Hi, everybody. This is Dave Levine with Trickle Research. This is sort of one of our new formats we're adding, and today we're glad to have with us Mark Ruport. Mark is the CEO of Sigma Labs. We started covering Sigma, I think, the end of October 2019, so little over a year. In that period, Mark came in as CEO. I want to say about May. Is that right, Mark?
Well, I joined in December as executive chairman, then came in May as CEO.
Correct. So, I've got some things, some senses of this industry, and part of which is sort of the basis of why I started covering the stock. So I thought maybe we could talk about a few of those things. But really, I just thought it would be good for people to kind of put a face to a name as far as Mark is concerned, and we'll just cover a few things that are on my mind. So, Mark, if you could sort of just give people a little bit of an overview of the company, and maybe that give them a little basis. A lot of people here who will watch this already know the company, but for those who don't, maybe just a little background would be helpful.
Of course. And first, David, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today. Sigma is a software company. We're headquartered in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And we develop quality assurance software for the additive manufacturing and specifically the 3D metal printing industry. And the reason that that's important is that quality, consistency, and standards are critical to the acceleration and acceptance of 3D metal printing. For those of you not familiar with it, it's used in aerospace, automotive, oil and gas, and medical industries to design and manufacture parts that are lighter, stronger, and more durable than you could manufacture with traditional subtractive manufacturing methods. And obviously, given those industries and those applications, quality, consistency, and a standard way of measuring and ensuring both are extremely important.
So, can you talk a little bit, Mark, about how the lack of, I have this notion, and I admit sometimes I take these things that I identify and maybe I make them bigger than they really are. But can you talk a little bit? It seems to me that the lack of quality assurance in the 3D metal printing industry has really kind of held the industry back a little bit. I mean, I think if you look at 3D metal printing, you look at things like, the way that we feel like the supply chain may be changing as a result of the things we've seen over the last year, for instance. It seems to me that quality assurance has held back 3D metal manufacturing, because I think that there are a lot of reasons to believe that 3D metal manufacturing has a really critical place in the supply chain of the future. So, I mean, I don't know if I'm overstating that or not, but I guess I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
There are several things that have held back the acceptance and acceleration of 3D metal printing. Quality and standards and consistency clearly are main components, but there's a saying that nothing happens for decades, and then decades can happen in weeks. And that was originally a saying that was attributed to Lenin. But you have technologies that have been around for a long time, and then something happens that causes those technologies to accelerate. Now, you mentioned the supply chain and the crisis from COVID, and when we realized as a country we were dependent upon these complex and rigid supply chains, and then we could get the parts for the ventilators and other things like that. And so that's a critical point and a juncture that is going to accelerate the 3D metal printing. When you combine that with technology like ours that addresses the quality and the consistency of the parts coming out of the process, especially if they're going into a body or an airplane or in a time of need, in a time of crisis when there's a shortage, all those things come together to create an acceleration in the industry. Quality and a quality assurance and consistency and a standard way of ensuring that quality is just one component, but it's a very critical component.
So, as I said, I started covering the story a year ago. I'd kind of heard it on and off a few times prior. And I sort of have a problem sometimes. I like to be the first analyst in a deal, and which by definition sometimes makes me too early. But I'd rather be too early than too late. So that's kind of what I do. But when I was assessing it originally, I do think that initially I didn't quite understand some of the challenges that the company has really faced. And I think some of those challenges, we sort of talk about a standard, of trying to create a standard, but part of trying to create a standard is really making the technology sort of ubiquitous across the landscape of different manufacturers. And I think that's worth talking about, because it seems to me that some of the challenges that the company has faced, and maybe why some of this may have taken longer than some people had hoped, was that trying to address those challenges of making sure that the product worked across that landscape. And that's a big challenge. I think maybe bigger than I probably maybe realized when I first started.
It's a significant challenge, and to give people a little bit of a more understanding of why it's such a big challenge. Number one, the technology itself is difficult. So we have a group of people that come from many disciplines that have worked for years on this technology. But once you develop the technology, then you have to apply it to the different types of printers that are out there. So each printer manufacturer or 3D printer manufacturer has its own quality assurance software. But as companies begin to build out their additive manufacturing initiatives, they're going to end up with different printers from different manufacturers. So therefore, there's a need for a common standard. For a software company, and a small one that's a startup in Santa Fe, New Mexico, we don't have one printer from every manufacturer. Some of these printers cost $1 million, and each one is different. The way they're designed, their own operating system, the process they use. So basically, we had to go into customers that had the printers and do development on site, import our technology, design our optics, and be able to accommodate the different printers from the different manufacturers. That took probably 2 years to go through and get the majority of the printers that are the most popular ones certified with our technology. So we did that mostly in 2018 and 2019. 2020, we were taking the technology to market, and of course, COVID hit. So all that preparation was slowed down by COVID and the crisis. That same crisis, though, as I mentioned earlier, is going to accelerate 3D metal printing. And it's at a time when we're well positioned to take advantage of it.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, so you have all these printers out there, and there's different manufacturers, but those printers are also different in terms of sort of the end products that they maybe are best at addressing. And so, I think originally when I looked at this, I really sort of felt like what Sigma was doing was probably more applicable to kind of some of the higher end printers, higher end jobs, just because, you're adding a piece of a cost to something. And so it made sense that could be absorbed by something that was a higher value product. But over the last few months, you've made a few topical announcements with respect to kind of reaching down that chain to maybe larger numbers of smaller printers, less complex printers, but also then an announcement, I think, regarding another printer technology. So just so everybody's clear, there are different 3D metal printing technologies, different kind of platforms. And so while much of what you've done or focused on in the past was on sort of one of those platforms, but now you've made some announcements that suggest that you're able to address other platforms. So can you just kind of cover sort of how that maybe really it's an addressable market question, I think. So can you kind of maybe give a little color on that?
Sure. When you look at the market, as you mentioned, there are different processes. The process we focus on is powder bed fusion. And that's where you have metal powder that's hit by lasers, and it creates a layer of metal. Each layer of metal is 30 to 70 microns, about the width of a human hair. So if you're making a part this big and it has all these layers in it, the difficulty is getting the consistency given all the variables. But that's one process. And you're right. Originally, we were focused at the higher end process because that's where the value is. But for us to become the standard for quality across all of 3D metal printing, we have to address not only the high end, but the mid tier, and also not only powder bed fusion, but other processes like DED, which we just entered into a joint relationship with Northwestern University to develop. So what we see happening is our addressable market going from the high end, which is a large market in and of itself, with our PrintRite 3D Light product. It allows us to address the mid tier, and with our DED product, it allows us to address a different process. Now, the reason that's important, as companies build out their additive manufacturing factories around the world, they're not just going to build one part with one process, because one size doesn't fit all. They're going to have different processes for different parts and different printers for different parts. The thing that's missing from that heterogeneous environment is a standard way of ensuring that the quality coming out from all those printers, whether the high end or the mid size, or whether laser bed or DED or some other type of process, have a standard way of being able to ensure that the quality meets the specifications that are originally set by the design criteria. So this allows us to do two things. First, it extends the addressable market, as you mentioned. But number two, it expands the ability for us to become the standard across all of additive manufacturing, 3D printing, not just one component at the high end.
So I think this ties a little bit. I want to cover a couple of the buzzwords, because sometimes I think we throw around some of the buzzwords, and I'm not sure everybody really understands. I don't always understand, and so I'm hoping.
Well, it makes us look smart.
Okay. Tell me, you've referenced the smart factory of the future. Can you just cover that a little bit so everybody knows what we mean by that?
Sure. The World Economic Forum just held its virtual annual summit a month ago or so. And they came up with the 10 technologies that are going to accelerate. Number 7 was supply chain factory of the future. And number 8 was 3D printing, by the way. But the factory of the future is seen to be location and process agnostic. And what they mean by that is you're able to build a factory on a pod, and you can locate that pod anywhere in the world. You can locate it on a ship. You can locate it, on the moon is what they're thinking. And it's a combination of technologies driven by artificial intelligence that allow you to manufacture things on demand, usually high value and low volume, and do that on demand anywhere in the world. So the factory of the future takes these technologies aided by artificial intelligence and allows you to design things at a speed and a complexity that were never thought to be possible. So it takes all the advances in digital manufacturing technology, artificial intelligence, technologies like ours, and makes it portable and makes it agile.
Okay, so I think along the same lines, but maybe not. There's another buzzword we use throughout some of this, which is the digital thread. Can you give us a little color on how that fits into the factory of the future, or if they're unrelated or related?
Yeah, digital thread is particularly specific to, and when I use it, to additive manufacturing or 3D metal printing. So if you have an engineer who has a design concept, you need design software that is specific to additive manufacturing as opposed to traditional manufacturing. Once you design it, you want to simulate the performance of that part. So you need simulation software that, again, is specific to additive manufacturing that can take that design of that lighter, stronger, more durable part and simulate it under conditions that could be expected from an airplane or a body or an automotive, right? Once you simulate it, then you want to be able to qualify it so that it can be approved by the FAA or somebody like that, or some regulatory organization. Then during the printing process or the manufacturing process, you have to make sure that it's adhering to those quality standards so that at the end of the process, when it's actually built and you do the post-process quality assurance, all that is a digital thread. And what you want is that connected throughout the whole process. So quality starts at the beginning. This is the old, in traditional manufacturing, when quality became important, or in computer software when security became important. What happened was, instead of it being thought of an afterthought, it was built into the early part of the process. So that digital thread takes the original concept from the engineer all the way through to the post-processing process, and make sure that everything is consistent with the original intent of the design.
Actually,
and of course, one other thing, of course, what happens is the end process then informs the beginning again. So your next design and simulation is better. And the better your design is, the better the simulation is, the better the correlation is to the end product, then this whole cycle becomes faster. And the thing that people are looking for is that cycle time. If you can reduce cycle time in manufacturing, reduce machine costs, reduce material waste, then all of a sudden you become very efficient and very agile.
So to that point, you raised that issue because I bring this up once in a while, and this might be another thing that I overstate sometimes, but in line with what you just said, I sort of feel like there, as you go forward here, that there's going to be kind of a data play in Sigma Labs. In other words, you're going to be out there and deployed, and you're going to be gathering data, and that data is going to be about different materials that people are processing. It's going to be about different things that they're building, and all that data. We all hear about big data, but there is a lot to the notion that as you collect data and you collect information about how systems work in certain environments, that you can use that data to go back and improve the inputs from the start. And is there a data play in Sigma maybe at some point in time?
Definitely. I mean, this is a ways off, but we're already collecting data. We're collecting data today based on material type and process that then creates certain defects or anomalies in design. And we're using our machine learning technology to be able to predict what will happen during the manufacturing process. Now, one of the other things that's held back additive manufacturing or 3D printing, in addition to the lack of standards, is a lack of collaboration. Because you have all these companies that are trying, from a competitive advantage perspective, to not only come up that proficiency and learning curve, but also protect their IP. So there's not a lot of sharing. What we see in the future, and other companies see in the future, not just us, but companies that are developing digital threads, is the knowledge base that's available to new people coming in, or new companies coming into and starting an additive manufacturing initiative. And they start with the knowledge that's been gained over the last decade by the pioneers. And so that knowledge base, or that data play, is a big play. The extent in which we play into it, we're not sure yet, but it is clearly on our roadmap. And we've already begun to collect data that's important for our process.
So This might make you a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Tell me, tell me how you feel like your background, and maybe you should cover that a little bit because I think it's important. You know, we say this a lot. I'm a generalist, so I write things from soup to nuts. And one of the things I like to say about the microcap space, and it's not that it's particularly intuitive, but you know, I think sometimes these companies come down to managers. You know, we've seen really good ideas in the past, or what I thought were really good ideas that didn't work very well. And I think because the managers weren't very good. And then a lot of times we see mediocre ideas that great managers took and turned into great things. So can you talk a little bit about your background and how you feel like that might be uniquely suited to helping Sigma and some of their challenges?
Sure. I've been involved with software for 30 plus years. I've run both private and public software companies. I've dealt on the application sides, managing organizations that sold ERP systems worldwide to manufacturers. And matter of fact, what's interesting, some of the companies that we sold the first ERP systems to in the late 80s are also the same companies that have additive manufacturing initiatives today. The most important thing about my background is that I understand multi-level distribution, I understand solution selling, and I understand OEM relationships and contracts. Our strategy is to sell to the end users like a Baker Hughes or an Airbus or a Mitsubishi that create the need for the manufacturers to pay attention to standards and quality and to work with technologies such as ours. And then to be able to build relationships with the printer manufacturers to OEM our technology. That's where we get the leverage. We're a small company. We don't have a lot of salespeople around the world. When a printer manufacturer comes in and sells their printers, we want them to OEM our technology as part of their solution. If they can't do that, we want them to at least then certify their printers as PrintRite 3D ready, right? So that gets the leverage. So if you tie that to my background, it's solution selling, multi-level distribution, and OEM to get the leverage into the business model. I'd like to say that Sigma Labs, had a bunch of theoretical scientists who came up with a theoretical product, but it has to be productized, it has to be marketed, and it has to be done through leverage and relationships around the world. So that's where my background comes in.
Okay, so you just hit on something that I think is really important for people to understand. And again, probably it's something that I'm not sure that I really understood when I first embarked on this. So, but it's becoming increasingly clear to me, and it's I'm glad you tied it in that way, because I think it's important to recognize that if those are your strengths, these are your strengths might be what have sort of become or been revealed as some of Sigma's weaknesses, which is that, as you started out in this, just so everybody's clear, the sales process has sort of had to start kind of backwards. I mean, you had to identify the problem and find the end user that was experiencing the pain points, which was the actual manufacturers. A Baker Hughes is actually manufacturing that part. And just so we get the vernacular straight, I'd look at that as kind of, I always call that the OEM. But what we have on the other side of that is another OEM who's actually manufacturing the printer. So we have people who use the printer that are manufacturing things, and we have people who manufacture the printer. And I think the challenge, the approach you've had to take, and I think probably as the way I understand it, is because of some pushback from the actual printer manufacturers OEM about their own Q&A processes and those being good enough. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I won't go down that rat hole just now, but the reality is that you really had to take the selling approach from the back end, which is find the end user, find their pain points, recognize that those pain points are things that are keeping them from using the technology the way that they would like to use it, and to try to instill in them the notion that you have a solution, and then to kind of hope that those people would push that pain point sort of down the supply chain to the manufacturers of the printers and make them finally understand that they need to adopt this. And it's real, like I said, for a small company, pretty big hill to climb. But it seems to me, as I look through some of the releases you've made, that it really does appear that you are starting to gain traction on the printer manufacturer side. I mean, obviously still traction for the manufacturers, people that are printing 3D products and using your system there. But maybe more importantly, or as importantly, it seems like you're starting to get traction on that printer OEM side. I don't know if I'm misunderstanding that, but if I'm understanding it right, how important is that?
No, you understand it completely accurately. So, I mean, here's the issue. There are three main components. The first is we have to work back from the manufacturer who's developing the part and convince them that there's a need for an in-process quality assurance, right? And when I say convince them, because they're coming up the learning curve too, and unless they're pretty far advanced and have multiple machines and have realized the problem themselves, they're not aware of the need. It's not critical for them yet. If they're in the R&D or prototyping phase, they're not that worried about quality production and material waste and machine time and so forth and so on. So the first thing is to convince the end user, as you said, and then use that to provide leverage to the printer manufacturer. I use the analogy, and you've heard me use this before, David, that when computer manufacturers came out with their own computers, they had their own security system, their own system admin, their own database, everything, right? Because it was a controlled environment. As companies got heterogeneous relative to the use of computers, different computers for different reasons, bought over different periods of time, all of a sudden the security software from one manufacturer doesn't work on the other manufacturer's computer. So the independent software industry was developed. So the same thing's happening here with printers. So we had to do a couple things. One, we had to convince the end user and put pressure on the printer manufacturer to open up their printers, or at least not void their warranty if a third-party software component like ours was installed to monitor their system. So those are both big mountains to climb. You had to climb what we talked about earlier, which was getting our technology across all these printers. So that's the first thing. You had to climb the hill of getting the end user to test your software and then put pressure back on the printer manufacturer. And then at the same time, we're in an industry that is, coming through formation still. It's not a mature industry. Everybody's coming up the learning curve. And this is all coming together to converge and accelerate. And so, all those things come together to make it a complex, difficult road. But it's a road that we've traveled over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a road that is very difficult for somebody else to replicate. So we feel very comfortable about our position, and we feel very comfortable that we set the company up to create that standard for 3D metal printing.
So it sort of brings me to my last point, which I was kind of going to put you on the spot about, but you may not want to answer it the way that I'll answer it. So I'll just go ahead and answer it, and you can comment on it if you'd like or not. I feel like, again, I understand more about the company and the opportunity today than I did when I first started this, which is not new because that's the way it should work, I think. But I think that, and there has been some components of this that I think have taken a little bit longer, maybe more so just because when I say a little bit longer, I don't know if that is in reality or just because of the way I perceived it when I started it, that maybe this process certainly hasn't been unreasonable. It's just maybe not my understanding of the things that still needed to be done. But I really feel like when I look at some of the challenges that we've identified and sort of where we've been and where we're going, I really feel like there's a lot of this is really starting to come together. And my view of that is that I really think that because of that, I think there's a very reasonable chance that 2021 is kind of a breakout year for the company in terms of commercialization of the things that we kind of hoped would materialize here. So that's my view. I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but I'd sure be interested.
It gets to the opening statement. Nothing happens for decades, and decades can happen in weeks, right? So, and what causes that is the convergence of these catalysts coming together. And whether it's 2021 or early part of 2022, or whether it started in the late half of 2020, it's somewhere within this next 12 to 24 months, 12 to 18 months. And so, yes, I see 2021 being the first year of significant revenue for the company. And the degree in which we get that revenue growth is going to be dependent upon the leverage we get from the model and the partners that we talked about earlier, and the acceleration of additive manufacturing in general. And so, yeah, I mean, we're at that point where the convergence of those factors have come together to create a tremendous opportunity for us to be able to execute. And if you've looked at what we've done over the past year, we've executed on every part of our strategy. So we're in that position. The convergence will happen, and exactly the time of that is yet to be known.
So what this has been bugging me since the last earnings call, because somebody raised the issue, and I had a notion in my head, and I wish I'd said it, but somebody was looking for sort of an industry comp. And I know that there's probably not a lot of them, for part of that's sort of the nature of the industry, but I sort of have thought that the best industry comp for Sigma Labs is Materialize. I mean, you've done some things with Materialize, but I think just in terms of being kind of a, I don't know, I guess the Levi Strauss of the 3D printing, an enabler that enables processes, so on and so forth. I thought that Materialize was probably a really good comp. Is that a reasonable view?
Yes, it is a reasonable view. I mean, they're early on into the 3D metal printing and additive manufacturing. Their software is prolific throughout the industry. They are OEMing their control platform to new printer manufacturers. And, of course, we have a relationship with Materialize where we're jointly selling our technology with their control platform to be able to enable a closed loop of manufacturing process. So Materialize would be the closest, comp, quote unquote, to what we're trying to establish. We're just trying to establish a different type of standard, but it's probably the closest comp that we have available to us.
Materialize has done well, by the way. I'll just throw that out there. So
they have.
So, Mark, that's all I have. I mean, I'm kind of hoping that maybe we can do this every so often. Maybe we can come back and some point in the future, not too distant future, and follow up and kind of see where we're at. But I really appreciate your time. I really am very constructive on the Sigma story. I just feel like the ducks are starting to line up here, and I feel like you probably have some better days and lots of opportunities in front of you. So I like the story. We're going to continue to sort of beat the drum here, and hope we can have you back and talk about progress in the future.
I'd love to do that. This is a very efficient way of doing it. I think it's informative, and it's better than me putting up slideshows and telling people the same thing over and over again. So I like the informal approach. I appreciate your interest in the company, and look forward to the next time having a similar conversation.
Perfect, Mark. I appreciate it. And if I don't talk to you before, then have a great holiday.
Same to you, David.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye.
See you.